The first article will explain the procedure for managing accounts in GS2. The function of GS2 account, which is responsible for account management, will be explained first. The account system provided by GS2 account is offered through a mechanism called anonymous accounts. Anonymous accounts work by identifying individuals with a system-issued user ID password without going through a sign-up procedure like a typical website. This allows game players the comfort of downloading a game and starting gameplay immediately. The weakness of anonymous accounts is that game players do not know their account information. Therefore, when a device malfunctions or a game is played on a new device, the game cannot be resumed with the previously used account. This is where the takeover feature comes in. The takeover feature can be set up by linking an anonymous account with the information of another account, such as a social account. The transfer function can be set up by linking an anonymous account to another account, such as a social account, and then using the same social account to perform the transfer process. This section describes the account authentication process in GS2. First, the game calls the account creation API for GS2 account. A user ID and password are then issued, and the result is responded to. The game saves the issued account information as saved data. From the next time onward, this saved account information can be loaded and logged in with the same account. Next, the login process is performed. The login process consists of two steps. First, the authentication API is called by specifying a user ID and password in GS2 account. Upon successful authentication, GS2 account calls the API to create a signature of the account information to GS2 key, which manages the encryption key. The game responds with the account information plus the signature information. Next, call the GS2 auth login API. At this time, the account information and signature information obtained from the authentication process are sent. GS2 auth again requests GS2 key to calculate the signature for the account information. GS2 auth checks to see if the signature obtained and the signature sent back match, and issues an access token if they do match. This completes the login process. What is an access token obtained from GS2 auth? If a user ID and password are sent with each API call, an authentication process is required each time. The access token contains the user ID and serves as proof that the user has been correctly authenticated by the authentication infrastructure with that user ID. In other words, an access token has the same characteristics as a user ID plus password. However, access tokens generally have an expiration date. When an access token expires, it must be authenticated again by the authentication infrastructure to obtain a new access token. This is to reduce the risk of password compromise by setting as short a validity period as possible, since there are limited measures that can be taken if the access token is compromised, although measures to change the password can be taken if the password is compromised. Why is the GS2 authentication process divided into GS2 account and GS2 auth? To understand this, it is necessary to understand the role of each. GS2 account has the function of anonymous accounts and handover, and GS2 auth has the ability to issue access tokens. The important thing to understand is that as long as you have an access token, you can log into GS2. This section describes an example of logging into GS2 using only GS2 auth without GS2 account. Many publishers have their own corporate accounts. In order to seamlessly connect such proprietary authentication infrastructure with GS2, GS2 account and GS2 auth are separated. The example shown here starts with the game performing the login process to its own authentication infrastructure. After successful authentication, the authentication infrastructure calls the GS2 auth API for issuing access tokens, specifying the unique ID of the user in the authentication infrastructure as the user ID. GS2 will be able to retain user data using the user's unique ID in the authentication infrastructure as the key. That is all for the prior knowledge of the authentication process in GS2. Now, let's implement it. Access GS2's Management Console. First, let's set up the initial GS2 account configuration. From the side menu of the Management Console, select Account greater than namespaces. A list of namespaces will be displayed. A namespace is an area that holds account information, and multiple namespaces can be created within a project. In this case, we will use the name account and proceed with the default settings. This completes the GS2 account configuration. Next, initialize the GS2 key to be used in the authentication process. Select key greater than namespaces from the side menu. Create a namespace named key. Unlike GS2 account, creating a namespace is not the end of the configuration process for GS2 key. Select the created namespace and create the encryption key. Create an encryption key named authentication key. This completes the GS2 key configuration. Finally, set the credentials. Select identifier greater than users from the side menu. Create a user with the name user. Open the Security Policy tab and set permissions. The security policy comes with predefined general permissions. Among them, Application Access is the one that is saved to embed in game programs. Finally, issue credentials. Credentials are issued based on the GS2 identifier user, and the API that can be called is determined based on the user's privileges. The GS2 SDK is used to incorporate the issued client ID and client secret into the game. Please make sure to keep a note of the client secret, as you will have no way to check it again once you move from one page to another. First, open Unity. We have already created a project and set up GS2 SDK and unit task. Create a C# script to start coding. Go to the code editor and create an async function to implement in unit task and execute it as a coroutine. Then, read the account information from player prefs. If the user ID or password is empty, the account is assumed to be uncreated. If the account has not been created, call the Account Creation API. Before that, initialization process of GS2 SDK is performed. First, a profile object is created. As arguments to the constructor, specify the GS2 client ID, client secret, and GS2 basic reopener, describing the basic disconnection-reconnection process. Finally, specify the region of the data center to connect to. In this case, we specify the Tokyo region. After creating the profile object, create the GS2 client. Finally, call the Account Creation API. For the namespace name, specify account created earlier. Save the account information as saved data. Assign the user ID and password to the variables in the outer scope, as they will be needed to log in later. Call the authentication process. For the namespace name, specify account as well, and for the username, specify the user ID of the account you have created. In addition, the cryptographic key ID of the GS2 key that calculates the signature of the authentication information must be specified. The encryption key ID can be found on the encryption key details page of the management console. GRN is an abbreviation for GS2 resource name, a so-called ID. Copy and use this. One more thing for the authentication API, you need to specify the password for your account. After successful authentication, you will get an access token. Calls GS2 Auth's login API. Specify the body and signature of the account information obtained from the authentication process as arguments. This completes the coding from account creation to obtaining the access token. Let's check the operation. To verify the operation, debug output should be generated for each process. This completes the debug output configuration. Create a cube object and assign the C# script you created. Let's execute it. Start is displayed and initialized is displayed. Game startup is complete. Create account is executed because there is no account information. After that, save account is displayed and authentication is executed. Login is now displayed and the access token has been obtained. Let's try again. This time, there is account information in the saved data, so no account should be created. Start is displayed and initialized is shown. The game is now ready to start. Previously, create account was performed after this, but this time authentication is performed suddenly. As expected, the saved data was loaded and the login process was performed using the same anonymous account as before. Finally, verify that only one account has been created in the GS2 management console. Indeed, only one account was created. This completes the operation check. Preview of next article. If you manually create an environment in the management console, you'll have trouble when building another environment. GS2 Deploy is useful in such cases to realize reproducible environment construction. Please look forward to the next article.